Good evening and welcome to Daily Politics on Trust TV, your destination for incisive and, of course, very robust conversations on politics, policy, and governance. I am Shafiu Suleiman. Tonight, we turn the spotlight on Nigeria's Federation account and a striking statistic: a 62% rise in monthly allocation to the 36 states and the FCT over the past 2 years under the Tinubu administration. Now, the surge, driven largely by the removal of petrol subsidies and exchange rate unification, was expected to translate into better lives for Nigerians. But as governors mark 2 years in office, many citizens are asking, where is the impact? To help us unpack the numbers and the politics behind them is Itia Otabor. He's the Director of Strategy at the African Center for Leadership, Strategy and Development. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Shafiu, for having me.
We appreciate you. It's been a while now.
Yes.
Good to see you again.
Same here. Same here.
Okay, we'll just go straight into the conversation. Even though at some point in the program, we'll play a video clip, to justify or to buttress what we're talking about. The level of deficit in terms of governance, which many feel, is largely as a result of the non-performance of the most of the state governments. But let me get your perspective. Yes. Attention has been shifted to the center, in recent time. Yeah. The presidency of Bola Ahmed Tinubu marks 2 years, in office. And of course, everyone is pointing at, there are mixed reactions as to whether it has performed or not. Okay. Largely, there hasn't been much interrogation of governance at the grassroots level. Let me get your perspective, especially going by the reported rise in this, in this federal allocation, 62%, more than half of what they used to receive. Yeah. How would you, juxtapose this with what is happening at the states level?
Thank you very much, Shafiu. And I think that what is happening now is simply unveiling or revealing what has always been the governance deficit at the subnational level. And so what you find out is that with these very factual figures that we now have in the public domain, that tells us there are kind of gargantuan resources that is flowing from the national to the state level, it has only revealed the fact that even while the numbers were not this high, there were enough resources to do substantial things at subnational level. Yeah. But the truth be said, governance at that level has over the years been under the radar. And like you mentioned, attention is mostly focused on the central, the federal government. And this has given a lot of the governors, let me not even say all of them, because without being told, you will agree with me that there are certain governors who performed in their states. Right. We cannot group all of them as not having performed. Right. But the majority of the governors at the subnational level have not performed onto the expected level to justify even the resources there. That rather what we have, or what the trend was, you find massive borrowing.
Even though some would say they were given a pat on the back, recently, especially looking at the borrowing trajectory. Yes. I've had, former Vice President Atiku Abubakar, commending them for not taking new loans in the last 2 years, and then their ability to also offset some of these loans, taken by either their predecessors or themselves in office. Some say that is commendable, at least. But then I think largely the focus has to do with the deliverables in terms of, touching the lives of the people, especially in the face of this cost of living crisis that Nigerians are witnessing. Before now, there has been, outcry all the time by the governors that we don't have enough resources, to drive development at the states level. But that has faded with this administration, some will say substantially, perhaps courtesy of the increase in the allocation. But what remains to be seen is how they are justifying this amount. Now, going by even the certain things, certain developmental projects, there are classifications as to how this development trickle, the issues around state I mean, there are things that the federation handle.
Yes,
there are those that the states handle, and there are those in the concurrent list. All can also. So looking at all of this and what the state's supposed to do in this time of hardship, do you see them targeting those vulnerable communities, in the face of this?
Shafiu, while we sit here, we might not be able to do a lot of blanket analysis.
Yeah, generally.
But there are certain indicators that I believe that you can use to benchmark or to assess a state.
Right.
And one of those things I will tell you is the fact that most of our states in this country seem to lack a strategy for development.
Okay.
They seem to lack a pathway. There was a time I listened to one economist, and he said something very profound. And he said to us that there are less than 3 states in Nigeria that actually has an economy. And what was he alluding to? He was alluding to a system in a state that has the capacity to generate within that state the productive potential of that state, harnessing it and create an economy that is systemic. And he said there were only about 3 states, and I'm sure if we were going to sit down here, you probably might be able to guess what those 3 states are.
I think it's obvious, even though some are also catching up.
Yes, but my point here is that whilst that is there, you mentioned something about the deliverables.
Yes.
And I think that one of the missing gap is the fact that there's been no effective synergy. You talked about the concurrent list and the exclusive list.
Right.
Now, you find that in a state, how have the states been able to say, look, this is what the federal government is supposed to be doing as per their intervention.
Yeah.
Let us focus on this one. So sometimes you see there an overlap. And when you overlap and you are doing or duplicating what somebody is supposed to do, sometimes it might not reflect in the deliverables you are able to give to your people. So I think
But why should that happen? Considering the fact that every arm of government, every tier of government has its own responsibility.
That's lack of synergy. That's lack of synergy. And you find out that, and I alluded to this when I said to you that most states, if you were to inquire today, most states lack appropriate strategy by which they are interrogating the development in their states. So what you find out sometimes, it's only been in Lagos, Shafiu, it's only been in Lagos that you saw a semblance of a strategy. And over 12 years, as they implemented that strategy, you can see the transformation that has happened in Lagos. But other states, maybe to a much recent past now, maybe Rivers State. But for other states, they've lacked that.
But some will also argue that the concentration, if you like, or attention of the center, is skewed in favor of some of those states, for instance. Yes, I know you're talking about Lagos. It's a center, it's a commercial center of this country, so to speak, the commercial nerve of this country. In fact, it's the 4th or the 5th largest economy in Africa. Its economy is even beyond some of the African states and so on. Now, there has been concerns around how, policies, how it's an advantage in terms of, position. Now, being the former capital of the state, has helped in activating, if you like, or spiraling its economy. Now, and then beyond that, there are also avenues where the state can generate money. The presence of the import, largely, it's an import gateway, so to speak. So these are certain advantages, it's privileges it enjoys.
Yes.
Same with perhaps Rivers, is an oil-producing state with also ports and all of that. So if you look at this, is that enough reason to think?
It's not, Shafi, it's not. And I think that in the 21st century, anybody who is still advancing those reasons today and saying Lagos has peculiar advantage, I think they are just being economical with the truth, and they are just not being, very real. I will tell you, Shafiu, there is no state in the Federal Republic of Nigeria today that with visionary leadership and exceptional ability to manage resources cannot grow beyond Lagos.
Right.
They cannot grow beyond Lagos. There's no state. There is a capacity in everything. It's just for those states to harness what they have and in a strategic way be able to develop that thing, they can also rise to Lagos. So saying that they have such peculiar advantages, to me, yes, they have advantages, but I do not think that it is just by having those advantages has made Lagos what it is. I think any state that is saying that they are disadvantaged, they are being economical with the truth. There's no state. Right. There's no state that cannot grow and develop to that extent.
Okay. Even though we also look at the framework, the legal framework, and of course how the country is structured.
Yes.
Yeah. But then I understand we need to look at this video.
Okay.
It captures some of these things we are talking about, especially the grip state governors have on their respective local governments and how they muscle them, decide, what they do in terms of their direction. Let's listen to this.
Okay. Because it was not just enough to bring a law that local government chairmen should live in their domain. It was to how will we enable them to live in their local government areas. I believe the answer to that question is here today. We have promised by the grace that we will build lodges for our chairmen across the 31 local government areas. And this was to be a prototype so that any contractor will be able to see it, the chairmen themselves will see it, and will long to live there. And so today I'm happy that God has made it possible for us to finish this, not just finishing it, but finishing it on time. And that's the beautiful thing about it. And I'm happy the chairman themselves, one of the chairmen said, all of us will live here with him until our own is ready. So I can guarantee you in the next 1 month, we will flag up the 30 other houses simultaneously. We have not asked you to bring money from your vote so you don't shortchange your people. As a state government, funding for this project is ready and intact. So when we flag up, we build. We don't want it to have any excuse. We don't want it to affect your allocation. This is one state. From the days of my predecessor, government has not tampered with the allocation to local government areas. And you yourself, that the Algon chairman today, you were in the last administration, you can testify to that. We have not touched your money. You will put in your jack and then allocate your money the way you want. But it is important that you dwell amongst your people. If you are a chairman of a local government, autonomous local government chairman, why are you leaving your autonomous community to go and live in another place?
Right. Okay, a classical example there.
Yeah.
You've had, the governor there, Akwa Ibom State Governor, talking about, the synergy you're talking about earlier between the states and the local governments and what was expected of them. Quite a number of states, may not have this privilege of getting their resources untempered.
Yes, true.
Yes, but here he is talking about, the allocations getting direct to them, and then the need for them to also reach out to the people. So what examples, what lessons can we draw from this, looking at what is obtainable in many other states, where chairmen will have to perhaps go to the state governor, or rather allow the money to go into the, and then the governor decides what they do.
I think the example that we just witnessed from the Akwa Ibom state governor is quite laudable. Right. And I must say that whenever we see examples like this also, they provide cheering impetus that things can actually work. Because I do not think that if it was not the case, he will not be bold on national TV to declare that the allocation actually gets to all these local government. And one particular thing he said that caught my attention, he said, we don't interfere with how you spend your money. Yeah. We allow you to spend your vote according to how. So that is the picture of the autonomy that we're looking for, and which I believe is the spirit of the move, even by this present administration, to say, look, let the local government be actually autonomous, not only in words or in letters, but actually in practice. And it's commendable that Akwa Ibom has been able to achieve this level of local government autonomy. And that in itself should become a benchmark for other states in the country. Yeah, you know, I agree with Shafiu that most states cannot boast of this.
Yes, I'm actually looking at the top performing states in the last year. That's from 2003. Talking about Lagos, FCT, Rivers, you know. These are I wanted to get a current one now, but the bottom performing states, you know, talking about Taraba, Yobe, Kebbi, you know, and quite a number of them. I know there's some increase in there's some changes in the last 1 year. Some states have risen. I'm trying to get that statistics. But then earlier you alluded to the fact that beyond the federal allocation, you know, every state has its own potentials. Yes. That is, it's only left for the those at the helm of affairs to look inward. Exactly. Yeah, but then there are also concerns around the framework, if not for in recent times, where there's some slight adjustments that allow states to manage or to take advantage of the solid minerals. You know, before now, it's very difficult because it is only the federal government that can, you know, administer some of those areas. So to what extent do you think that the legal framework or the structural situation, you know, of the tiers of government affected the subnationals? Like I said, I believe that in all its practicality, those will be excuses. Yes, it's true that by the structure we operate, the federal structure we operate, there are a lot of things in the state that belongs to the exclusivists, like mining and solid minerals and all that. But the question would be that those are not the only thing you can exploit. Power generation, until recently, centrally. Yes, those are not the only thing. But you see, I think that every person, and you see, we keep coming back to Lagos. And I think it's not just because Lagos has those advantages. But if you have a visionary leader, let me give you an example. Even while there was that issue of power under the exclusive list, the administration of Bola Tinubu in Lagos was the first to try and generate electricity. You know the popular Enron project, where they generated electricity on barges. But the only thing that now came into play was when the federal government insisted that all the energy that was generated must be sold to the federal government, and they would determine where they will send the energy to. And the man said, okay, I can't do that. I got this thing to develop Lagos, and we know all the impasse. My point is this. My point is this, and I'm very careful in making that point, is the fact that every state can operate within this federal structure and still be a very prosperous state that can deliver the dividends of democracy to their people. I still hold that. The most basic thing that has been proven that is the facilitator of development is the agriculture. And that's not under the exclusive list. So every state, I was saying to somebody that, do you know that you could take just one plant, I will mention the state, one plant, and all of the value chain in that one plant can change the economic trajectory of a state. And that's why I am bold to say that every state has that potential, Shafiu, but we have not been able to harness it because over time, states have been lazy, depending only waiting for money that will be shared in Abuja. Yes, that's the truth that has to be told. But what does that speak about? That's the truth that has to be told. The level of synergy, because you know, virtually all of this you're talking about, for instance, agriculture. Yes, federal government also has several areas it is intervening,
yes.
Either in a supply of fertilizers or in providing the necessary mechanization,
yes.
To support the states as well. But then for the states that have this comparative advantage, some are doing better, some would say, like Niger State, for instance, where the governor is focusing on agriculture, and a few other states. But there seems to be a lack of synergy in terms of delivering the policy. Or rather, working together with the center to deliver this. States are largely operating on silos.
Yes.
So why is that happening?
I agree that in itself is a fundamental issue, and that's why initially I said to you about strategy and synergy. Yeah. But who are you going to hold? If you are a state governor and you have a plan, you have a strategy for action to transform your state, I think the onus lies on that governor to see how he can how will I say, he can latch in on what the federal is doing in his ability to draw the best to his state. It's the governor, it's the state governor that should do it. It's not even the federal. I should be the one approaching the federal government and say, look, you have this intervention plan. We have this. This is where the two of them can meet and can have synergy. Not only for the good of our people in the state, but ultimately for the federation. Right. So the issue of synergy has always been a fundamental issue in our politics. Also fueled by the fact that sometimes when those states governors are in the different party from the federal government. Yeah. So all those now begin to also play. Yeah, oh yes.
Does that justify the reason why we're seeing this cross-carpeting? Governors switching allegiance, because some of them have even alluded.
No. It has nothing to do. It has nothing to do with that.
They really want to. Be on the same political party with the government in the center, so that they can also take advantage of some of this.
No, Shafiu, both of us sitting on this table this evening, we know that those are not the real issues why these governors are defecting. We know we cannot pretend and play the ostrich. We all know that sometimes we cannot dance to the tunes of some itinerant politicians who will enjoy vacillating from one end to the other. We know. Any politician that is telling you is because he wants to stand with the center or align with the center, that's why he's defective. Well, they might have that, but I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced that you can do everything you need to do for your state without necessarily having to be in the same political party as the one in the center. Right. I hold that opinion very firmly.
Right. You were earlier talking about agriculture as one of the sectors that could just, could raise, if you like, the what is at the state level, or rather help the states to get out of the current situation, especially the cost of living crisis we are talking about. A state that is food secure could also have security, because it's a spiral effect of that.
Yes.
Now, education, which is also in the concurrent list. What do you make up with the investments? I'm trying to get, some of the statistics. Investments in education by the states, going by this increase in federal allocation. 62% is not, increase. We're talking about over 50% increase. So, what have you seen in terms of improvement in investment in education, for instance, across some of the states?
Now, I don't have the most recent statistics to quote, but I will tell you that over time, you will find that most states, when you examine the budgets in those states, education sometimes will be maybe second, third, or fourth in terms of allocation that is put aside for that venture. But it's interesting that with all of these things, Shafiu, you still go to predominantly the rural areas of the states, and you still see dilapidated school buildings. You still see places where the teacher to student ratio is still very dismal, and you still see people learning under very abysmal conditions. And then you'll be wondering, all of this allocation that we hear in the budgets for education, why are we not seeing translating into both the physical development and also in terms of even enrollment of children in the school system. And those comes also to the fact that I think at the end of the day, the character of the governors or their priorities begins to come into play. Right. If they don't prioritize those things and they feel that it's important, and you see, once again, it leads me to the point that you made, Shafiu. Whilst I mentioned agriculture as having the potential, is because the value chain that you can get from agriculture holds a unique potential to elevate any economy and to do it very far. You are getting food security, you are getting byproducts of those agricultural products that can help stimulate your economy, provide jobs, provide other industries.
And tied to it is also livestock development.
Yeah, so the value chain is massive. Cassava alone, we've been told how many byproducts you can get from cassava. So you imagine if a state just picks only cassava and decides that we're going to maximize and we're going to plant cassava, and then the byproduct industries that will only come up from that. It's amazing. And the states have all this information on what they can do. Some is just fruit. Wow. Kenya harvest flour in Kenya. By the next morning, those flowers are in shops in Europe. Flowers. So that's what I'm saying.
You mean in terms of value addition or in terms of export, ease of doing business in terms of
you cascade it,
processing.
You cascade it. Yeah. For instance, I said even if you don't take cassava, take food. There's some places where you see all of these fruits, and you talk about food processing. Yeah. That alone as an industry, or you talk about those who rear animals, husbandry, the milk and the yogurt and all that. So the potential is always massive if it is well harnessed. And don't forget that all of those potentials in those value chains have the what you can call the concurrent value. Yeah. For instance, if I'm producing fruit juice and I'm supplying and I've exhausted the market in my state, I begin to take it to the next state. Yeah. And I thought that was the idea where some of the states started having cargo airports. The idea was to say, okay, if we can have that synergy where we are producing something here, we can bring it to the airport. Those
cargo airports have become white elephant projects.
That's the problem. States. That is just you've just hit the nail on the head. When you conceive this project, one of the things that Shafiu that would really dishearten you, if you go to some of the state airports, only one flight per day. Or sometimes 2 flights. Yeah. How can you sustain an airport with just 1 flight per day? And then when you get there, you see all of those trolleys, you see all of the cars in the taxi car, and you're wondering, once that aircraft comes and it brings that passenger, if you don't get a passenger that day, the whole business for that day is over.
Yeah, isn't that also a matter of priority that you're talking about? Because you're prioritizing building airport, but you're not adding value or investing in your comparative advantage
around you.
I mean, in agriculture, in tourism, in other potentials
that will make the airport functional and viable. Yeah, that's the gap.
Quite a number of areas that you can take advantage.
Yes.
For instance, you have an airport. Say in Kebbi, for instance, where you have onions, where you have, rice production and all of that.
Exactly.
So, and then where you have also tourism potentials, like the Argungu Fishing Festival and all of that.
That's the synergy.
So you add value to what you are doing.
Yes.
You now attract investors and attract tourists.
Exactly.
In that case, then the airport would now be viable.
We'll be busy.
So, but in most cases, you find that those
because the governor comes. Because the governor comes and say, okay, let me build an airport. And he's not asking himself, how will the airport be viable?
Right.
What are the concurrent things around the airport? Just like you mentioned, if you do that, and as you are building the airport, you are building that base, you are building an agricultural complex, you are building spaces where you are going to be producing, and you need to evacuate those things, then the airport will naturally become viable. But when you are building an airport based only on the fact that you want to be able to fly from, instead of you flying from Lagos to another state and then use road to finish your journey, let me build an airport yourself. When I'm flying, I'll fly directly to my city. So some of these reasons are not well thought of, and that's why I said to you that there was no strategy.
Right. Okay. I understand there are quite a number of NGOs, for instance, civil society organizations that are working with states, to prioritize the critical needs of the people. The budget, even the budgeting itself. I can remember that this particular NGO that works with the state to ensure that allocation is made based on what the people need. But largely, you find out that the governors at the state level, do prioritize projects that will give them you know, the alleged kickback, you know, the 10% or whatever, you know, they are not looking at projects that have direct bearing, you know, on the ordinary citizens. Like what is the need, for instance, of building, you know, flyovers and what have you, when the people are hungry, when the people cannot afford, you know, when businesses are collapsing? Why not channel those funds into powering the economy, into empowering the people and all of that? So how are you looking at some of these mechanisms to check what the excesses or what the governors are doing to make sure that they prioritize the people's need?
You know, my view has always been, Shafiu, that it is not so much how much resources that you have, but we've established here this evening that it's about how you deploy those resources.
Right.
It's not about, maybe, like, to use your example, as a governor, you are building flyover. If you are building the flyover because there's a known traffic gridlock that normally happens around a particular place, and you've observed that if I put a flyover in this place, it will free this place, and at the end of that road is maybe an industrial complex that I want to ensure that they have free movement in and out of that complex, then it's not bad to build a flyover. But just like we identify with the issue of the airport, the issue is when I want to build a flyover somewhere, what is the reason for building that flyover? What critical things and what other value will it provide? So it's not just about building, and I don't want to go into that political economy of what you mentioned about wanting to cite or to go about projects where you can get, you know, this large whatever you get from it. I don't want to go to that, but I'm just saying that if the intent is based on well thought out strategy, and to say that, okay, look at this area, it has vast potential for agricultural transformation, and there's no road to that place. Let us build this road, because as we are building this road, we are developing this area so that when this begins to produce, the road will be there to evacuate. That's how you plan. It's called integrative planning. It's called system planning. So you plan based on that. But that's what has been missing. You don't just go and put a flyover where it has no value. It has no multiplier effect. That's what I'm looking for. It has no multiplier effect. That by putting this flyover here, it will create this multiplier effect that will become a positive deliverable for the people. That's why it is wrong. And I think that what drives that is because I find that most governors, most states do not even have a strategy plan. If you ask most of the states, some states tried.
So what happened to their budgetary estimate, budgetary plans?
Yes.
Because year in year out,
if you don't have a strategy plan, what are you budgeting for? What are you budgeting for? How would you allocate resources when you don't have a plan to take you from where you are to where you want to get to? But if you have a strategy that has become the fulcrum by which you have developed a strategy plan, it tells you where you are going. And you can sit here and say, if I follow this plan, in the next 4 years, we'll be self-sufficient in this, we'll be 60% in this, we'll be 40%. What do I need? I need X amount. Then you start to budget. But if you don't have all of those things, you are just, every year it's a ritual. You just, okay, education 50%, infrastructure 30%. To do what?
And implementation also is very critical, because it is not just about allocating the resources or just about the projections. How much of this implementation, you know, in fact, sometimes you find out that implementation is at 20-25%. So of what effect is the...
It is 20%, Shafiu, because at the end of the day, you know, and I don't want us to sit here. I'm very careful. I don't want us to sit here and look as if every time we come on air, we're always trying to criticizing. No, it's not about always criticizing. And that's why we said that there are some governors who have at least, we listened to one governor here talking about autonomy. So we can say, look, if
there
it's
are
possible,
those who also excels in provision of infrastructure.
So we're not saying that
their respective
exactly.
states.
We're not saying that they're not
some
governors
that have
who are
also
performing.
made impact in education.
We're not saying
I've
that.
seen some of the statistics.
So
some states have been doing well in terms of you know, reviving the education sector.
Exactly.
You know, allocation to education, which is very central, like Kogi and quite a number of states that I've seen. So it is not
Delta.
Yes, you're talking about it. Now, but then looking at because there is need to interrogate, you know, what comes into the state beyond the federation account, you know, which we are talking about, 62% increase in terms of allocation.
Massive.
You know, and then there comes the IGR. We're talking about how to build the IGR to also complement what is coming from the center. And at the same time, some of the states are also still being given bailout, or funds, being channeled towards the states by the president. Not long ago, the president was talking about, is it 200 billion naira to Kano, another 200 billion naira to Kaduna, and all of that. So these are also, not part of the budgetary allocation, but then to support certain sectors. But if we look at it, and then we look at the what is coming in terms of the indices of development in those states, human capital development, employment generation, you will find out that in most cases they don't tally.
Yeah, I agree with you, and it will still boil down to the fact that sometimes you cannot mandate development in the sense that you can't decree it.
Yeah.
It takes a combination of a visionary governor, a people mobilized, and a strong citizen participation in the process that produces the kind of development that they're looking for. Sometimes all of these things don't come together at the same time. Sometimes you might have a governor who is visionary, but maybe they tell you about the people around him might not be that in sync with what he's trying to do. But what I can say to you, Shafiu, is the fact that you mentioned something that is very important, which is in terms of the fact that even apart from the FAAC allocation that you kept on, I see you kept on saying that it's gone beyond 62%.
Right.
I mean, gone up by 62%. Most people don't even pay attention to the IGRs. Sometimes they don't even really come into play in terms of people's reckoning of the kind of resources that is coming to the state. But those are important revenue that the state generates and ought to complement whatever the state is doing that should translate to visible, non-debatable value that people can see. But if after 2 years you go to some of the states, and I think that's the crux of what we started discussing, you're not seeing anything on the ground to show that,
there's increase.
There's not just increase, massive increase.
Yeah.
Massive increase. Because the amount, and let me tell you, that was one of the promises the president made, and to say that when subsidy is removed, it will free resources
to the states and to the local governments.
So on the president's part, is he freeing resources to the state? He is. Then the question is, on the governor's part, what are they doing with those increased resources, and how is it translating to the development of their state, such that people can actually see that there's a difference.
Tangible development.
That's all. And I think that's the challenge of development that we are facing right now.
Okay, the checks, we have to also look at the checks. We were talking about the local governments earlier, which are very central to this development at the state level. And we've seen how, even the local government autonomy is foot dragging. The government is pushing, but there is a backlash. There is, a kind of push-pull effect between the federation and the states in terms of implementation. But looking at, the centrality of the local governments and the need to ensure that this autonomy, see the light of the day. How much of is it persuasion now, or how much of this, checks is being provided, not just by the civil society organizations who largely have a responsibility to do that, to follow the money, to ensure that this come to fruition, but also the state legislatures. They are primarily to check the exercise of the executive. How much of role, do you think they are playing in terms of realizing this objective?
Well, you find out that, I think it was one of the programs we had here where we're examining the practicability of implementing local government autonomy.
Right.
And we saw that even though it was very, very dramatic, the way the federal government, or the president, to use that keyword,
trying to push,
went about to push, going straight to the Supreme Court to get that ruling to say, look, local government autonomy should not only be on paper, but it should actually be practicalized on the field. But you agree with me, Shafiu, that even after that pronouncement, there's so many obstacles that still lies in the way of actually translating that ruling into something that is pragmatic on the ground.
You think the governors are taking advantage of a certain lacuna in
and don't forget that old habits will not change overnight.
Yes.
And I think that one of the things that
old habit dies hard.
They die hard. And I think one of the things that you have seen that is also propelling that habit from dying is the fact that if you look at the landscape right now, has there been any sanction? Has there been any repercussion for any state that is actually not practicing? We were here when we analyzed the fact that one of the key things that was thrown as a booby trap for the local government, central bank, they say local government should go and open an account with the central bank.
Yeah.
You know, that is created all the whole, I don't know how many local government have been able to achieve or to, because government wanted to start paying the money directly to local government, avoid the joint account and pay but we know that itself has been bogged down by a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of issues. So I don't know how many local governments. So at the end of the day, it comes back to local governments still being tied to the apron string of the governor. And especially in states where you have the governors as being very, very
influential.
Very influential, that they hold their state assembly in check. Yeah. They can't check.
Is that not what is obtainable almost in all the states?
Maybe not all. We saw an example in Akwebom that at least the governor himself saying, we don't disturb you.
No, so I'm talking about the other arm of government, legislature. Largely, in the pockets of the state government.
Yeah, because most of the time, the legislature, you go there, all the members of the legislature are all the same members of the same party. I mean, how can that happen?
And perhaps maybe the governor has an influence over this election.
That's what happened.
And their emergence.
Of course.
So he decides.
Of course. We know that, and by antecedent and by historical practice, that's always been the case. So when he's the one that has the direct hand in all the State House of Assembly members' emergence, they will pledge allegiance first and foremost to the governor.
Right. Okay, but how much of this, the citizens looking at the citizens situating them within the conversation now. 2 years into the life of an administration, much focus on the center. At the state level, there hasn't been much interrogation as to what the governors are doing. And in most cases, they get away with it. Nobody interrogates how much money has accrued to the states, how much is being invested, what is the direction and all of that. So how do you think the citizens can also play a role here to ensure that there is accountability on the part of the leadership?
Sometimes it's, I work for a national NGO, and sometimes we program around citizens mobilization in the budgeting process. We are implementing the OGP, which we call the Open Government Partnership.
Yes, and that's what I was trying to
yes, and that's what we
refer to earlier.
The Open Government Partnership,
right?
But that is limited to co-creating a people-centered budget. And the idea behind the OGP is when you bring citizens, largely through the CSO's landscape, to interface with government, and they come together and they agree that these are what are the needs, and then they co-create a government, a budget, and all of that. The priorities, we call them the priorities. They agree that we can't do all, but we can choose
what is the basic need.
What are the basic needs, and what are the priorities, which you also mirror the state's potentials and the state's strength. And so when they agree, they now take that into the budgeting process. But after you now budget, after you now put all of those things in the budget, the question, like you rightly said, is that going away from the budgeting process, how do we now ensure that those things that were budgeted for are done?
Really implemented?
And that's where you find out that most of the time, NGOs who are at that subnational level sometimes don't have the kind of exposure or the kind of strength and capacity to be able to interrogate all of these things. And sometimes what you find that it still takes government, NGOs, civil societies from the national who try to come there to the state to try and capacitate them. And most of them can't do that because even the funding to even do that is also limited.
But isn't that also exposing some of these non-governmental organizations, largely concentrating in the center, without decentralizing their functions? And this is where it matters most.
Yes.
Because development starts with the grassroots.
Absolutely.
Largely.
Absolutely.
So you leave the chunk of the money and of course where it should make more impact and then concentrate on the center.
Yes.
the likes of Serap and quite a number of them.
Absolutely.
Always on the neck of the federal government.
so always seeing the government.
Right. So why is it that we are not seeing the effect at where it is needed the most?
I think I will say that in recent times there's becoming a very, very clear shift in that kind of a focus.
Right.
There are funders who basically now even mandate those that they fund that they must have a criteria for ensuring that even if they get the funding at national, they must be able to cascade their work, and particularly not even they themselves doing the work, but they must find collaborators at the subnational level, and they are mandated that they must build their capacity and ensure that they are able to do that work, which they would have come from the national to do. So it's an increasing shift that we have seen in the CSO ecosystem, where even the partners, the funders are beginning to say, look, if we keep doing these things the way we've been doing them, those at the grassroots are not capacitated, they are not strong enough. And if you don't capacitate them, you just come and you do a program and you do a training and you leave them, and they are not the ones that are the recipient of that bulk resources to do the work, you might not be able to achieve the kind of results that we're looking for. So let's change the strategy. Let's change the approach.
Okay, a matter of policy now, for instance, the federal government has been talking about lifting people out of poverty, but then in the bracket, keep widening. More people fall into multidimensional poverty year on year. We're talking about over 100 million people living below poverty line. And if you look at it, most of this state contributes, significantly. Take, for instance, the 2023 statistics, and it keeps, it remains almost the same, year on year now. For instance, the states that are always on top are states like Sokoto, Taraba, Jigawa, Ebonyi, Adamawa, Zamfara, and Yobe, with some of them even having 87%
of the
poverty level.
Yeah.
So how can governors in those states, explain
exactly,
why this is keep widening in spite of the amount of money they are getting from the center? Is it that the money is not trickling down, or is it that what exactly is the problem? Why is it not changing the narrative?
Well, Shafiu, I think the governors are the ones that should come and explain.
Right.
But looking from the outside, I've said to you on several occasions that we've talked that you cannot mandate development. If you have a governor in the state who does not have,
we can hold leadership accountable.
Of course.
Okay.
If you have, but you cannot mandate. You cannot say, okay, you as the governor now, I mandate you to develop your state. If the governor of a state,
what happened to the charter now?
The manifesto.
The charter even, because your contractual agreement with the people is that they elect you, to change. To impact on their lives.
Yes.
Chapter 2 of the Constitution. Statistically,
they are beautiful words.
Strategically talking about.
They are beautiful words, a few. But the reality is that how much of those words, when they become those state executives, are they able to translate? And I leave you with this. Even our recruitment process, leadership pipeline, all of those things are what people are beginning to interrogate now, to ask ourselves the quality of the people that actually get to leadership. And I told somebody an analogy. I said, if you have a man who has never, Shafiu, look at him in his lifetime, he has never intervened in anything that has to do with the public giving.
Right.
You cannot see in his past, you cannot see in what he has done in the past, that this person has a desire to change the society, to change the narrative concerning development. It is not possible that when he now becomes a governor or a senator or somebody, that all of a sudden that desire will simply now fall on him and he wants to do that. It's not possible. It just does not happen. And I tell you that most of the people that sometimes find themselves in these places, they are people that have not been prepared. They are people that are not equipped. They are people that do not even have the heart for what they want or they are saying they want to do. The process that threw them up and the process by which they emerged has been such that they don't own any allegiance or any empathy to the people. They don't own anything. They now come into that position and they will pursue personal agenda. They will pursue maybe parochial agenda. And at the end of the day, they will spend a number of years in that position. They will not be able to point to significant holistic change.
Yeah.
When I mark my significant holistic change, I'm not talking about go and tar road here and go and do one hospital here. Significant holistic change. A change that is systemic, a change that you can see that has produced an economy for the state that has a lot of value additions and value chain. So that's the difference.
Yeah, in other words, the leadership recruitment trajectory has to also change.
It has
Citizens
to change.
have to also be mindful of who they put forward for election.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Itia Otabor, Director of Strategy at Africa Center for Leadership, Strategy and Development. Thank you very much for your informed perspectives.
Thank you very much for having me, Shafiu.
That's a wrap on today's edition of Daily Politics. Do join us tomorrow. We'll be back with another interesting topic and personalities. Until then, enjoy the rest of your day.